Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this week's edition of the Pro Wrestling Report on television. Dameon Nelson, sitting alongside The Coz, Frank Cosentino. It is Wednesday, December 8th, or Friday, December 10th, depending on where you're watching us. Welcome, everyone, here to PWRshow.com. We've got a special episode for you this week. It was the internet wrestling community, you, that picked.
It's your fault.
You picked this month's edition of 10 Best. And as voted on at PWRshow.com, it is the 10 Best Wrestling Finishers of all time. And we'd be remiss if we didn't mention that you could also vote for the 2008 Pro Wrestling Report Honors. Special episode coming on December 19th at PWRshow.com as well. So, Frank, this is the 10 best finishing moves in professional wrestling. Finishing moves. For years, they have been defined by that single move, that moment in the match everyone was getting to where you knew it was over and the definitive 1, 2, 3 would come after. We don't see it in every instance, but in more often than not, we do see the finishing moves actually finish a match. So we've got our 10 best. Mead had not with us this week. He was with us this past Monday
had Chris
on ESPN
Jericho,
Radio.
And then Chris Jericho's move, and then Chris Jericho.
Oh, Chris Jericho's different finishers.
Right. All 10 of them.
So let's get to the list here on the 10 best finishing moves in professional wrestling history. We'll start with number 10. And number 10 is, we go from 10 to 1 being the highest. And for me, I would have to say it would be Billy Kidman's shooting star press, Frank. It was always a work of art.
Yep.
And it's unfortunate we don't get to see it on a regular basis anymore. Several other people have done it, but it was done best by Kidman, I think, because it was in WCW especially. It was just such a sweet, beautiful move. In WWE, less significant, but still a great move to watch. So that's my number 10, Billy Kidman's shooting star press.
It's a solid move. It was neat how because it was new. No one had really done a move like that. So I can't. It's not in my top 10, but definitely.
That's okay, Frank.
It's one of the.
Can't all be like me.
Can't all be like you. My 10 now. I'm going to show my age with some of you here.
Better than showing your ass.
No, we don't want to see that.
It's a southern term.
That's
you act
ratings
out.
drop right there.
Show your ass.
My number 10 is the Sheik's Camel Clutch.
Sheik at NLKC?
No. The Iron Sheik.
Oh.
Yes. When he used this thing, he beat Hogan with it. He used it many times in his victories, and it was his signature move. You knew once he locked it on someone, basically the match was over. So my number 10 is the Iron Sheik's Camel Clutch.
And I don't think anyone will ever forget the scene of Hogan in the Camel Clutch. Backlund in the Camel Clutch.
And then the towel.
And Arnold Scotland throwing in the towel to end the match, which is how the Iron Sheik became the WWE champion. Iron Sheik's been on this very program. Make sure you check out the interview section of PWRshow.com to see one of the few calm, sane interviews that the Iron Sheik has done. But a good pick. He also had Hogan in the move, but Hogan not going to submit to the Camel Clutch. Number 9. The best finishing moves in wrestling history, I would have to give to Abyss's Black Hole Slam. He executes it so beautifully, it comes out of nowhere, and it truly is, when you see it, the end of the match. Abyss, Black Hole Slam from TNA. Number 9 for me, Frank.
Number 9 for me, still a little bit old school.
You're showing your age.
I'm showing my age. This is Sergeant Slaughter's Cobra Clutch.
It's all about the clutches. Do you carry a clutch?
No, but I once drove a car that had a clutch.
That was horrible. That was a typical Frank Cosentino joke, by the way.
But you got to have one every show. Cobra Clutch, there's a lot of wrestlers that kind of used some type of maneuver like it, like $1 Million. Ted DiBiase used it, a similar move. But again, once the Sarge locked that sucker on, that was it.
It's a matter of time.
All right.
As they used to say. Now it's elementary, as Tony Schiavone used to say.
So my number 9 is Sergeant Slaughter's Cobra Clutch.
Number 8 on the Pro Wrestling Report presents the 10 best wrestling finishing moves of all time. For me, anyways, would have to go to Kurt Hennig, Mr. Perfect's Perfect Plex. Again, a finisher that went right into a pinning predicament and generally signaled the 1, 2, 3. As a matter of fact, I can't remember a single time anybody kicked out of the Perfect Plex, at least up until his first run in WCW before coming back to WWE. Obviously, the late Mr. Perfect, but with just one of those great finishers that, again, it came out of nowhere, because it's easy to set a guy up for a suplex and then just hook that leg and it's all over. It's out of here.
God rest his soul, but he was a great wrestler. Now, he was a great finisher. Number 8 for me is real old school, goes back to AWA days, and it's Baron von Raschke's The Claw.
And that's all the people need to know.
It's a move that when we interviewed him a couple of times, and he's basically has said that was a move that was given to him when he was who was it? It wasn't Stu Hart, maybe it's Stu Hart, but someone had said you might want to try this, and it worked. And at AWA, it was his move.
That's really a tribute to the good old days of wrestling. Because several people had the claw. I mean, there was the Von Erich claw as well.
Right.
It was a finishing move for a lot of people.
And
of course, once Kerry
Erich
came to WWE, they no longer used the claw as a finisher. It was the tornado punch. But just amazing.
Just put it on the temples of your head, and he was out. And the fans went nuts.
Yes, indeed they did. And speaking of fans going nuts, let's go to number 7 on the best finishers of all time list. Number 7 for me would have to be not for its painfulness, but for its sheer significance. And that is Hulk Hogan's leg drop. As a kid, growing up, you saw the big boot after hulking out. Then to the ropes. Down came that leg drop. The leg drop, the most devastating move in the history of professional wrestling. Comes down, you knew that match was over. Hell, I don't believe many people were kicked out of it ever, except for I think the Ultimate Warrior may have at WrestleMania 6. But be that as it may, aside from his heel days, the leg drop for Hulk Hogan, truly a finishing move, and could have been the beginning of the people's elbows and the five-knuckle shuffles of the world, because it really was a simple wrestling move. But again, remember, finishers, Frank, it wasn't the move as much as the expertise and the delivery of the person who executed it.
Right.
So given that, and given the belief that was suspended in professional wrestling at the time, it was devastating, and we believed as children that a leg drop, a devastating leg drop, more devastating so than that of Yokozuna's 100 pounds of ass coming down on your face, was a devastating finishing move. But number 7 for me, Hulk Hogan's leg drop.
I was going to put it on my list, but I'm like...
You just couldn't.
I couldn't do it because it was just not... But you make a great point. It wasn't for its devastation. It's just guy dropping his leg on your chest. That's not going to do anything. So I couldn't put him on my list. If I would, it would have been probably in this spot, possibly. But I'm giving this to the Gagne Sleeper. Again, this is old
Greg's or Vern's?
Both. It didn't matter. Once, again, the crowd reaction. Once Greg Gagne or even Vern Gagne, and more so Greg than anything, I think, where the crowd would actually go nuts. If you ever watch any AWA thing, Greg Gagne wasn't...
You can find that on ESPN Classics on 11 midnight Eastern, I believe.
Greg Gagne was a good wrestler. He could move around pretty well. But when he locked this thing on, fans went crazy.
They knew it was over.
I went crazy when I was that young.
It was a definitive end to the match.
And that was it. The Gagne Sleeper was just a sleeper move. But he made it famous. He makes my top 10.
Better than Brutus Beefcake Sleeper?
Yes.
Better than Brutus Beefcake Sleeper with a head cut after?
Yes.
Better than the Spurs to the head of Brutus Beefcake by Bob Orton after the sleeper?
Exactly, yes.
Remember when that was blacked out on Saturday Night's Main Event? It was one of the most heinous things that had ever happened in wrestling. They had the big red X on Saturday Night's Main Event when that was happening, and you thought Brutus was dead. So number 6 on the PWR best finishers, 10 best finishers in the history of professional wrestling. For me, I would have to give it to the clothesline from hell, owned by JBL. It is very believable, and it is it's a lariat. It's a long arm lariat. It's nothing more than that. But again, it's another situation where it's the person executing it, and his big burly nature, being from Texas, makes a lot of sense that that's his finishing move. And it's another one of those moves that you can snap out of nowhere, and you find all of a sudden somebody's groggy in the ring, boom, boom, off the ropes. Here comes JBL, clothesline from hell. That is the end of the match.
It's solid when it's done perfectly. Now, the only issue I have with it, he's got to have the right wrestler to make it work. The execution is so key on this. Otherwise, the slap isn't right and the whole thing. But it's devastating. That's a good pick. For me, number 6 is Jake Roberts' DDT.
Ooh, the DDT.
This was something that when he put it was phenomenal how this guy pulled that off. Again, you got to have the right person with you. But once he locked that thing in and smacked.
Short arm clothesline straight into the DDT. That's how it always went.
It was good. And when he was in his prime, it was one of the best finishes at the time.
The best DDT may have been when he DDT'd Mr. Fuji on an episode of something, and his hat never came off. And Fuji laid in the ring, humping the ring. That's how he sold it. He was humping the ring.
It's on YouTube.
That was class. His hat never came off. And remember, back in the day, you never, ever saw Fuji without his hat. It wasn't until he aligned himself with the Yokozuna, essentially.
And when he wrestled.
Yeah. Well, before that. People don't remember that stuff. The AWA days. Come on, Frank.
Well, I think he did wrestle. Didn't he wrestle Mean Gene?
Oh, we don't speak of that necessarily. Number 5, ladies and gentlemen, on the top 10 finishers of all time in professional wrestling. For me, it would have to go to another spontaneous move that can be caught out of nowhere, and that is Shawn Michaels' Sweet Chin Music. It's a reverse thrust kick, but he executes it so beautifully well. And I will go off on a limb and say the best person to ever sell Sweet Chin Music is Randy Orton.
Yes.
Randy Orton sells it better than anybody ever has, but really good move by Shawn Michaels. Best when he doesn't tune up for Sweet Chin Music. Best when he catches it out of nowhere, and he has done it so beautifully so many times to so many people. We'll just be standing there all of a sudden, boom, there's the kick. And remember, the first time we really saw that as his finisher, as his defining move, was in the barbershop when he turned on his partner of the Rockers, Marty Jannetty.
Solid pick. My number 5 would be my number 1 if it was done about 10 or 12 years ago.
So you're not dating yourself anymore.
Right. And it's Petey Williams, the Canadian Destroyer. This move right now is awesome. It is the best finisher, but it just doesn't have the longevity yet to make it number 1 of all time. It's amazing. Again, the other wrestler has a lot to do in this thing.
If not all. Petey's just got to be in the right place at the right time.
Right. But it is, the first time I saw it, I went, wow.
What just happened? What was that?
And you have to watch it in slow motion.
Every time it happens.
You have to watch it in slow. This is where, if you ever want to be a wrestler and say, these guys, all they do is just, they know what's going to happen and all that, that's fine. But to make this finisher work, it's almost like poetry in motion. It's amazing. Right now,
is that on your list?
Go ahead. Yeah. It is it would be my top finisher if it would have been like 10 years ago, and it lasted. But I couldn't put it number 1 yet. But it's definitely a top 10. It's amazing.
And it's a flip pile driver. We've seen Petey and many others do it for a long time, but this move is getting very popular, and I've not heard many that wouldn't put it on their top 10, if not top 5 list of professional wrestling finishers, because it is just so intriguing to see, because you really don't know what happened. You know it was a pile driver at the end, but you really don't know
the flip,
how it got there.
The flip is just, it's amazing. You have to watch it in slow motion.
Much like people do this program. Only when Meathead's on to try to understand what he's saying. We're going to take a time out, ladies and gentlemen. When we come back, it is the top 4. We've got the final 4 on the list of the 10 best wrestling finishers in the history of professional wrestling. We'll be right back here on the Pro Wrestling Report.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Pro Wrestling Report on 540 ESPN. Hey! Carry on. Wow! Oh, so wait. On Saturday, you said, shut up, Meathead. This is the fantasy show. I'm not going to pull that PWR stuff here. But now we're on the PWR show. I'm telling you, shut your mouth. We're live all over the world and specifically all over southeastern Wisconsin on 540 ESPN. Welcome to
I'm a crash hit. My claim to fame is my brain insane. And if the blame is framed, then I'm a smash hit.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Pro Wrestling Report here on Time Warner Cable and at PWRshow.com. Dameon Nelson sitting alongside the man they call Frank Cosentino, the Coz, the Italian Stallion.
No.
Our own little Salvatore Sincere. Did his finisher make your list?
No.
This is voted on by you, the viewers, as far as the theme of the show, but this is the 10 best professional wrestling finishers of all time. We've gone through our list, and let's recap that list so far. The first 5 from number 10, Shooting Star Press, performed by Billy Kidman. Number 9, the Black Hole Slam, performed by Abyss. Number 8, the Perfect Plex by Mr. Perfect Kurt Hennig. Number 7, Hulk Hogan's Leg Drop. Number 6 for me was the Clothesline from Hell from JBL. And number 5, Sweet Chin Music by Shawn Michaels.
And for me, it's the Sheik's Camel Clutch, Sergeant Slaughter's Cobra Clutch, Baron Von Raschke's Claw, the Gagne Sleeper, Jake Roberts' DDT, and Petey Williams' Canadian Destroyer.
Let's go now on the list of the final 4, if you will. And number 4 on the 10 best professional wrestling finishers is, at least in my opinion, the Stone Cold Stunner from Stone Cold Steve Austin. Another move that defined a wrestler, a move that was so spontaneous and so active that it really fit his character. And a lot of people had done a neckbreaker kind of move like that many a time before, but this was special because all it took was a kick to the gut. We should do a list of that number of finishers that start with a kick to the gut. Kick to the gut, and then there's the stunner out of nowhere, and everybody sold it. Much like we talked earlier about who can sell the Sweet Chin Music best, I don't think anybody sold the stunner better than The Rock every time he got it, because he just about elevated himself in the section 108 in the arena every time he got hit with the stunner.
Vince McMahon sold it?
Oh, he got a horrible stunner.
One of the first time that he ever
September
took
22, 1997,
and
Madison
he just
Square
shook
Garden.
in the ring.
Raw was war. JR, the first, one of the first non-wrestling recipients of the stunner.
Yep.
Then it was Jerry Lawler, then Sergeant Slaughter, then finally it ramped up to Vince McMahon. But Stone Cold Stunner, number 4 on my list of top 10 finishing moves.
My number 4 is DDP's Diamond Cutter, which is something similar.
We didn't plan that, folks. That's not in the pre-tape.
It's something similar to the stunner in a way. It's a move where, at the time when WCW, it could come out of nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
The Diamond Cutter could come out of nowhere, sometimes he'd jump off the rope and do it. He'd jump off the top rope and do it. Whatever variety, it worked. What also worked in this is he'd come to the ring and make the diamond. And if you remember, Karl Malone was in a match with DDP,
basketball player?
The basketball player, back in WCW.
For the Pistons?
He played at the time for the Utah Jazz.
Knew it.
And during a game, he did the Diamond Cutter symbol, and I think that's what started the process of, hey, how would you like to be in the ring and make some money for charity? So for me, number 4, Diamond Cutter.
And here's what's interesting about DDP. DDP was one of those wrestlers, especially if you watch on those AWA Classics, who you never thought would be anything.
No.
He was a manager with the Diamond Dolls.
Yep.
And got his chance in WCW, was a good champion in WCW, spent a bit of time in TNA, was good there, spent a bit of time in WWE, sort of got lost there in the shuffle that was WWE. It was also at the time they were burying WCW. So, but the Diamond Cutter, surely another move that defined him. It fit perfectly. And a lot of times you wonder who picks these moves. Is it something that is agreed upon by the bookers and the agents and the talent, or is it something that they pick up on their own? But we do see a lot of, in the case of Booker T especially, the bookend, which he wasn't able to use as his finisher while The Rock was around,
right.
Because it was the rock bottom, all pretty much the same. Very good pick, number 4 there, Frank. Let's go to number 3 now, the top 3 wrestling finishers of all time. And I'm going to go with one you picked earlier, your number 6, Frank, Jake Roberts' DDT. We talked about it earlier, but the slithering snake with the DDT to end the match with the snap he could put on it, which I haven't seen anybody do as good as he does, really, again, defined his character and was a good selection of finishers by the man.
My number 3, we just talked about it. It's The Rock's Rock Bottom. Now, I was thinking...
Rock bottom! Rock bottom! Rock bottom!
I was thinking, could it have been the People's Elbow?
Oh, Frank, no. If Hogan's leg drop couldn't make your list, how could you have even considered the People's Elbow?
Exactly. That's what I'm thinking. No, it's got to be the Rock Bottom.
The Five-Knuckle Shuffle is going to be number 1. Shuffle.
No. This was a move that, once it was done, it's like, why didn't anybody else think of that? It wasn't... It's not as devastating, but The Rock made it look good. Again, the other wrestler had to sell it pretty well. But when he did it, again, I'm looking at crowd reaction. How does the crowd react at a finisher? They went nuts every time he did. Even before he would try and lock it up, they were going crazy. So my number 3 is The Rock's Rock Bottom.
Scenarios. We saw several different ways that the moves were used. You talk about the People's Elbow, you talk about the Rock Bottom. Early on, we saw the People's Elbow used mid-match, and then Rock Bottom was the finisher.
Right. So,
towards the end, it was the Rock Bottom followed by People's Elbow,
right,
and then the pin. Which was better in your opinion, sequence-wise?
I really don't have a favorite, to be honest.
So you're Sweden, Switzerland. Knew it.
To be honest, it didn't matter. But once the Rock Bottom was placed on, it was one of my top 3 finishers.
Number 2 on the list of top 10 finishing moves in the history of professional wrestling as we near the illustrious number 1 is Randy Orton's RKO. The slithering snake that he is, Randy Orton, who can just crawl up and stalk you before executing that move, is absolutely perfect for him. The RKO, we've seen it come out of nowhere as well. We've seen him reverse out of other people's finishers into an RKO, which is always an act of beauty. I think he did that actually when he won the title in 2004 at SummerSlam. But this is just another great move, and we don't want to get too cliched here or say the same thing over and over again, but it really matches him as a wrestler and his persona, whether it be heel or face. He is the RKO, and it's a great finishing move.
It's a good finisher.
Similar to a diamond cutter.
And it's similar to
if not the same.
A stunner. The difference is he kind of jumps up a little bit. Mm-hmm. He doesn't kick someone in the gut.
It's graceful as well.
He literally gets up in the air a little bit to do it, and that's what, it's a little variation of it. It didn't make my top 10, but it is a strong finisher, and it fits him perfectly.
And his isn't sudden. We talked about the sudden impact of a lot of these finishers. Right. He stalks his prey before launching and attacking that RKO, which is, I think, what makes this so much better. That's half the move right there, in my opinion.
My number 2 is Ric Flair's Figure 4. Again, this is something that had longevity's added to it. It's not it takes time, obviously, and later in the career, it would usually get flipped over, and then he would get into it. But again, crowd reaction. That once he like started kicking at the knees, kicking at the thighs, he knew it was going to come. Once he locked it on, especially in his prime of his career, and he's shaking his head, you're not going to get out of this, and would win a match with it.
And that would be at the end of a 30 or 60-minute match, by the way.
Now, what made it in my top 2 is it would take a good 30 seconds, maybe a minute, maybe longer. The crowd still was in it. It wasn't a sudden, bam, 1, 2, 3. So it was a build-up to it. When it happened, you're still building it up. Is that guy going to get out of it? Ric Flair's number 2, Figure 4, for me.
What a lot of people don't realize, and that's a great choice for number 2, what a lot of people don't realize is for a long while, Ric Flair's finishing move was simply a suplex. And for a long while as well, he would alternate between the Figure 4 and the suplex, and could win the match based off one of those 2 moves. So another simple move, but Ric Flair was that classic wrestler, and that worked for him, 2 of them being wrestling moves. So it was not far-fetched that this man could do a suplex so well that it could end the match. Frank, it's time for number 1. And what your and I's opinion is the greatest single finishing maneuver in the history of professional wrestling. You've heard those words before, correct?
Want me to start this one?
Sure, go right ahead.
Mine is Doink the Clown's finish. No, I'm just kidding.
Is it the nose squeeze?
Whatever it is.
Somebody had that
it's
as
Papa Shango's finish where he just went, "Ooh!" Mine is Stone Cold's Stunner. The reason why I say this, and if you kind of get the idea of what I'm going through, the moment you all remember when he'd come out, you hear the crash.
When you hear the glass, it's your ass.
Place would go crazy.
What they used to say.
And sometimes you go to before the match would even start, and someone dropped the glass in the concession stand, and people were like, "Yeah, it's Stone Cold."
We love those wrestling fans.
Yes. Once he kicked someone in the gut and did this move, I have never been in such a loud arena in my life. When he did this at the Bradley Center, he did it numerous times. But the first time I heard it, I went, "Wow, that is it." It's not like a crazy move. It's pretty much a simple move. It's a snap move, but based on crowd reaction and how he delivered it, to me, it's the number 1 finisher of all time.
Oh, good choice. If I may be so bold as to say, the definitive number 1
it is the definitive
professional wrestling finishing maneuver is none other than Petey Williams' Canadian Destroyer. I have said for many a year that it is the single greatest finishing move in the history of professional wrestling of all time, in my opinion. It is so artful, so masterful, so effective that how could you just not love it? And yes, I think it's better than the other 9 I've listed. And I think that, while it is simply a flip pile driver, and simple, it's not easy for Petey, it's not easy for anybody who's in the move to execute that, because you've got to be right place, right time, and in the right motion in order to get it to happen so beautifully. But here's the good thing about it. It happens so damn fast, so damn quick, that much like a stunner, much like a sweet chin music, much like a clothesline from hell, RKO, you don't know it's coming. You're hoping for it, and Petey gives a signal. You're hoping for it, but he usually signals and doesn't execute. He executes later on.
Right.
And there was actually one instance where he executed off the top rope a Canadian destroyer. I mean, it's just an absolutely fantastic move. One that really shows the physical acumen, as Vince McMahon would say, and talents of Petey Williams and all of the talents in TNA and anyone else. I mean, it's used a lot in Ring of Honor. It's used a lot over in Japan. It is a definitive closing move, and it is the single greatest finishing maneuver in the history of professional wrestling, in this man's opinion.
I want to just add, when it's not in my top 10,
does that make it 11?
It may be 11, but Rey Mysterio had, I don't know what it's called, when he jumped off the top rope and kind of flip under the guy, underneath the guy, and then grab his leg and pin him. He didn't use it as a finisher a lot.
Modified.
It was amazing how he was able to do that. Someone out there will tell me what it is exactly, but he jumps off the top rope, gets under the guy, and then flips the leg over. A couple of the wrestlers use it. Didn't make my top 10, but it was amazing how it was executed.
And you've got so many of those out there now. You've got Evan Bourne.
Yeah.
That amazing.
There's so many now.
You've got Rey Mysterio, as you mentioned, with that new airborne kind of frog splash he's doing. The Undertaker's tombstone. The choke slam would have been on this list 5 years ago, I think, maybe 8 years ago. Yeah. Didn't make it in any case this year. Tombstone, I just can't get by the fact that most times you can't see their head hit the mat. So there's that disconnect there.
Jerry Lawler used to do the pile driver all the time.
Who's got a pile driver for a finisher? I mean, the flip pile driver, the Canadian Destroyer won.
They don't do that as much because of the risk of injury. Because you literally got to cock your head the right way. The guy's butt's got to hit first. Otherwise, that's neck problems right there.
A lot of great finishers. I mean, The Miz, Morrison. So many great finishers out there.
And for women, I almost put her in it. Victoria's Widow's Peak. Fantastic. She's my favorite women's wrestler too. But when that's executed well, it's devastating.
Well, thank you so much for tuning in, ladies and gentlemen. We will have another best of edition, 10 best rather, edition coming up next month in January here on the Pro Wrestling Report. Now, you can head on over to pwrshow.com, go to the polls section and under the interact section, and select the next category of which we will deliver the 10 best. Now, also feel free for these episodes to submit us yours via email or via the forum, and go ahead and let us know what yours are. We'll read them and include them as part of these episodes. Now, all of these finishers we just mentioned, you can view in the special best of section, 10 best section of the pwrshow.com website. We'll have videos of all these finishers so that you can rate them and determine what your thoughts are as to the 10 best finishing moves of all time. As we said at the top of the program, don't forget to go vote for the 2008 Pro Wrestling Report Honors. That show coming up in just a short time on December the 19th. And the categories are live, and you'll be surprised at how some of the categories are shaping up as far as the voting goes. But it's all about you, the fans. Those are true votes. And remember, as much as people hate to hear it, the 2007 Wrestler of the Year was indeed John Cena. Yep. And we'll see who gets that title this year. For the man they call Meathead, The Coz, I'm Dameon Nelson saying thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you again next week right here on the Pro Wrestling Report.